Hello, it's Dr. Goodin. It's great to see your smiling faces. I say that, I actually can't see them. I like to say it because if we were in person, it would be great to see your smiling faces. In this video, we are going to talk about the determinants of strength and power through the lens of biomechanics. What makes some athletes more powerful than other athletes? And we're going to address it from both a muscular and a neural standpoint. Okay guys, like I said in the intro, we are going to be talking about the biomechanical determinants of strength and power. And there are roughly two categories, as we will see. There are muscular components and neural components. So let's dive right in and take a look. This comes from Chapter 2 of Essentials for Strength Training and Conditioning by the NSCA. This chapter was written by Dr. Jeffrey McBride. Now, as I mentioned, we have two primary components for strength and for power. The first is neural control. Now, we've spoken before about recruitment and rate coding. So recruitment affects maximal force output by determining which and how many motor units are involved in a muscle contraction. Remember that that's the only way for our muscle to grade the force output. It's through synchronous motor unit firing or through rate coding. And rate coding, remember, affects maximal force output by determining the rate at which motor units are fired. So we have how many motor units, and we have how quickly or what rate those motor units are being fired at. And that's all of neural control of strength at the motor unit level. We also have muscle cross-sectional area. Remember that more CSA means more actin-myosin cross-bridging. Okay, so a bigger muscle is, all other things the same, a stronger muscle. Now within a muscle, we also though have the arrangement of the muscle fibers to take into account. A pennate muscle is a muscle with fibers that align obliquely to the tendon, which creates a feather-like arrangement. And the angle of pennation is the angle between the muscle's fibers and an imaginary line between the muscle's origin and insertion. So not all of the fibers in our muscles just run longitudinally directly in line with the muscle's line of pull. In fact, most muscles have some sort of pennate arrangement in which there is the muscle's line of pull. Let's say that this pencil represents a line of pull of a muscle. Okay, so let's say that it's rectus femoris, and when it shortens, it pulls on the patellar tendon, right, to extend the knee. The muscle fibers of the rectus femoris don't just run in the same direction. They actually run off at an angle from it. So if it was this way, it would run down at an angle so that when they contract, they pull obliquely to the line of pull. Now this angle of pennation allows our muscles to actually pack more contractile elements into the same amount of cross-sectional area. Okay, so here are some different types of arrangements. We have radiate muscles, which are found in your gluteus medius. These are just some examples. Multipennate muscles, which are found in your deltoids. We have bipennate muscles, like found in your rectus femoris. Unipennate muscles, which can be found in tibialis posterior. Fusiform, which are found in your biceps brachii. And then longitudinal muscles, similar to those in your rectus abdominis. And each of these different arrangements of the muscle fibers allows for unique contractile characteristics of those muscles. The more pennation, typically, the lower the contraction velocity, but the greater the force of contraction. Because instead of shortening along the line of pull, each of those sarcomeres, as they're contracting concentrically, they're shortening obliquely to it. And because they're oblique to it, they essentially form the hypotenuse of a triangle. And that hypotenuse is the longest side of the triangle. So as they're shortening, there's a relatively smaller shortening of the entire muscle along its line of pull. But because more sarcomeres are able to be packed into that cross-sectional area, they shorten with a greater force production. Now, another factor is the actual length of the muscle, and we talked about this in a previous video, but muscles can develop different amounts of tension depending on how far they are stretched. So at resting lengths, the actin and myosin filaments lie next to each other, and a maximal number of potential cross-bridge sites are available. This is when the muscle can generate the greatest force, typically. Now, when a muscle is completely contracted, meaning it's run out of room to continue contracting, these filaments overlap. So we have a reduced number of cross-bridge sites. Similarly, when a muscle is stretched, we also have a fewer number of actin and myosin cross-bridge sites because those filaments are no longer lying close to each other. So if we look over in this diagram, you can just see visually that if you maximize from here to here, where those myosin globular heads are, then you get the greatest number of potential binding sites. Joint angle can also change the amount of strength and power that a muscle or group of muscles can exert. So the amount of torque depends on force versus muscle length, leverage, type of exercise, and the body joint in question, the muscles used at the joint, and the speed of contraction. So all of these things are different really from joint to joint, and different joints are stronger or weaker at different ranges of motion. All that to say, we can't assume that a joint can produce the same amount of force when it's completely flexed or when it's at its end range of extension versus when it's right in the middle. We've already talked about things like the length of the muscle coming into play or the change in the moment arms of the muscle or of the resistive force, and all of those things contribute to changes in force output at different joint angles. The muscle contraction velocity also plays a key role, and it's nonlinear, but in general, the force capability of a muscle declines as velocity of contraction increases. In the last video, we spent a lot of time talking about the amount of time that you have to generate force. So in powerlifting, you have all the time in the world, and in weightlifting, it has to be very quick, very explosive. Same thing with track and field, because you are usually moving a small implement or just your body down the track or through the air. So you have to produce force very quickly. Now, as the velocity of movement increases, typically the amount of force that the muscle can produce decreases. Vice versa, the amount of force that's required from a movement, as that increases, the velocity at which you can move in that movement decreases. So the higher the force requirement, typically the lower the velocity of movement, whereas the higher the velocity of movement, typically the less force you can exert during that movement. Now there are two more factors to discuss. The first is the strength to mass ratio. So in sprinting and jumping, the ratio directly reflects an athlete's ability to accelerate his or her body. For example, let's imagine somebody who weighs 70 kilograms. If they can only produce 70 kilograms of force, let's say in a back squat, on top of course, moving their own body weight in that back squat, versus somebody who can produce 140 kilograms, that's double their body weight, in the back squat. Imagine what happens when those two individuals are asked to jump. The first individual, who can only squat 70 kilograms, does not have very much of a strength reserve that they can draw upon. And similarly, the amount of force that they exert to jump a certain height will be a much greater percentage of their overall capacity to exert force. Whereas that individual who can back squat double their body weight, now they have this extra reserve of strength, and any force that they output in that jump will be a lower percentage of their overall force production capacity. And because it's a lower percentage, they can probably, and we've seen this to be true in research, they can probably produce that force much more quickly. It's way easier to get to 30% of your force output, and you can do that more quickly, than it is to get to 90% of your force output. And so if your requirement is lower relative to your max, then you will be able to be more explosive. Now in weight class sports where you have to stay within a certain body weight in order to compete in that weight class, what we want to do is to maximize the athlete's strength to mass ratio within that weight class. Okay, so there's such a thing as indiscriminate hypertrophy, meaning that we can actually, in weight class sports, make the athletes too big. So at some point their muscularity actually outpaces their ability to continue producing more force quickly with those muscles. So imagine a bodybuilder. Yes, they're strong, and actually many of them are pretty explosive and athletic. But if you put a bodybuilder next to a sprinter and you ask who has a better strength to mass ratio, I would probably bet on the sprinter every time. They don't have the indiscriminate hypertrophy of every single muscle group. They're just focused on the muscles that move them down the track, and they're focused on keeping a relatively low body weight while maximizing the force production ability of the muscle that they do have. So strength to mass ratio is a big deal. Now typically though, as body size increases, the body mass increases more rapidly than does muscle strength. This is why, given constant proportions, the smaller athlete usually has a higher strength to mass ratio. And this is something that's actually true across the animal kingdom. The smaller the animal, typically, the greater its strength to body weight ratio. And the same is true for humans. So the most impressive lifts of all time, like if you consider the people with the greatest strength to mass ratios, it usually occurs in the lower weight classes. And this is not only because of the amount of muscle that they can develop in proportion to their structure and their frame and their organs, but it's also because of the things we've talked about before, like the joint angles that they can achieve and their leverages and the moment arms of their muscles and the mechanical advantage that they can operate from when compared to taller individuals. And the fact that they don't have to produce as much work when they're lifting a load over their head because they're much shorter, so they don't have to lift it as far. And so we typically see that these smaller athletes are able to perform at a much higher strength to mass ratio. So the key point here is that in sport activities such as sprinting and jumping, the ratio of the strength of the muscles involved in the movement to the mass of the body parts being accelerated is critical. Thus, the strength to mass ratio directly reflects an athlete's ability to accelerate his or her own body. Okay guys, so we talked about neural and muscular factors to strength and power. For the neural factors, we have motor unit recruitment and rate coding, and for the muscular factors, we have muscle cross-sectional area, but also the pronation of those muscles. Furthermore, we have things like joint angles to worry about, things like strength to body weight ratio, and all of these things together, when we consider all of them, now we're really considering the overall holistic picture of how we can begin to train our athletes to generate more strength and power given their starting point, given their anthropometrics, given their height, given the relative amount of musculature that they arrive in the weight room with. And understanding all of this through a biomechanical lens is going to help us to be a more analytical coach as we consider the best training interventions for them. All right, thank you guys for watching this video. In the next video, we are going to talk about the 3 basic types of muscle contraction. So click on over to the next video. I'll see you guys there. Reach out to me in the comments below if you have any questions. It was great hanging out with you. I'm Dr. Goodin, and remember to stay strong.